Welcome into Rounding the Bases.
Round the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. It's around the bases. Everybody knows Joe Goldberg. He's a man, goddamn.
Welcome into Rounding the Bases, the podcast about culture and leadership with a baseball twist. My name is indeed Joel Goldberg, and hope your 2022 is off to a good start. Little secret here. We record some of these in advance, so I don't know how your 2022 is going because I'm technically still in the latter part of 2021. But I can tell you this much, no matter what the year, my guest today brings the best of Britain to the heart of the Midwest. How many people can say that? He's a media man who has mastered the art of contrast, whether through moderation of polarizing, if not contentious topics, with his signature brand of cheekiness or delivering real news alongside a healthy dose of personality. He's a great personality. Nick Haines is the executive producer and host of the PBS primetime program, Kansas City Week in Review. His skillful ability to navigate differences is the only part of what has also made him is one of the only parts that has made him having the ability to navigate these differences. A 4-time Emmy Award winner. By channeling the power of TV, he bridges divides and, in light of our many differences, convenes citizens to foster a sense of community. And I'm so excited right now to be joined by a master moderator, a gentleman that I enjoy watching on television, Nick Haines, who also has the best accent that I know in Kansas City, along with another friend of mine who has the same accent, but you guys are both right there. Nick, how are you, sir?
Hey, good. You know, I broke the accent barrier in Kansas City. I was that first person who came in when they said, hey, nobody in Kansas City would like a British accent. You should be in Boston or New York. Well, I came here. That was 30 years ago, and I've never looked back since. And so many other people with different accents have now coming into the Kansas City market, and it's now considered, hey, a normal thing.
Yeah, I mean, that I hadn't thought about that because, I mean, traveling all over the country for baseball and having lived in other places, you know, it is a little bit more common to hear all types of different accents from all types of different parts of the world on the coasts or where I grew up in Chicago. And you don't hear as much of that in Kansas City yet. You're right. It is becoming more common. And you have been a voice, a personality here for so long. And I want to delve into that. Let's start with the simple, how in the world does a guy from Wales end up in Kansas City?
I will tell you, when Crosby Kemper was the head of the library and we would convene citizens at the Kansas City Library, he would always introduce me at the very beginning that Nick only put on this accent and he's actually from the Ozarks. And he'd go off for a while on this and people would laugh. But actually, I am from Wales in the United Kingdom, and I'm from the same hometown as Richard Burton and Anthony Hopkins. Yes, the cannibal in Silence of the Lambs. I don't eat many people. I certainly don't bite. So that's a positive thing during this podcast. But my wife went to the University of Kansas, did her junior year abroad at a British university. And my degree was in Soviet politics. Mm-hmm. And so we went on a trip for 3 weeks to the Soviet Union, as it was then called. This is in 1988, Joel. And when I met her, I knew I was going to marry her. And that's an amazing thing. I hadn't been in many relationships beforehand. I wasn't certain about it. I knew I was going to marry her. We had a transatlantic relationship for 3.5 years. Again, it was from Russia with love, if that's not too corny. I came back and forth to the United States. You know, in Britain, average vacations are 6 weeks a year. So I had plenty of time to come out here. She was still a student. And so she had plenty of time off. And we just hit it off. And I've been here for 30 years.
This is home, obviously, as it is for so many people. I love talking. I mean, myself, too. I didn't grow up in Kansas City. My wife did, and it was a little bit of a coincidence, not totally a coincidence that we ended up back here. We had a familiarity with it, but you know this. I mean, people end up here. They don't necessarily expect to be here long term, and they fall in love with it. That's been the case. But I think one of the many aspects of this city that it's the same as any other city is we have our issues, we have our debates. And that now, and I mentioned it in the intro that I'm recording here in the latter part of 2021. I don't know what issues, as we run this podcast and it actually airs, I don't know what issues you'll be talking about on PBS in January of 2022. but I'm guessing they'll be contentious. Of course, they'll be important. The world has changed. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, and I have all types of guests on this show. Sometimes it's entrepreneurship. Sometimes it's CEOs. Sometimes it's sports. I always have a fascination with news and journalism because of my background, is that the world is changing. The way we consume news, the way we deliver the news, the way we argue about news is changing. Yet you have been able to maintain that foothold here in this market. How much have you had to change and adapt with the times, or how much are you still the same Nick Haines as ever?
I just had this conversation just before we started this. And my view is that my values have by and large remained the same. And you hear people say, for instance, they might have been in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, and they'll say, for instance, I never left the party left me. Or they might be in the Catholic Church left me. And in some respects, my views have remained the same, whereas the media has changed. My view has always been we are here to try and bridge divides, shrink the distance between one another. I have always had a fascination and curiosity with people who have very different views than my own, and a respect for people with different viewpoints than my own. We are now in a media market today, of course, where a lot of the prizes go to those who are going to be dissing and bashing people who don't think the way you do. And so that has never been my approach. And that's why also, by the way, I've been successful in doing a lot of these contentious conversations you talk about, that I'm trusted by people on both sides of the political aisle to do debates, to be an honest broker, and rather than trying to inflame folks, to actually try and bring people together and better understand differences.
Yeah, there's something there too, Nick, because and I find this with now the panel discussions that I have when I started my speaking business and the podcast and doing keynotes and all that, I do get asked to moderate a lot of panels, typically going to be less contentious, more about a topic where people are going to get along. It's going to be enlightening. But the common thread to me, at least in what enables me to do that, for instance, if I get up and I'm leading a panel discussion on diversity, equity, inclusion, and my panel often is going to be all African American or all men and women of color. And, I'll usually make a joke right away that I'm sort of the one that doesn't fit here. I'm the white guy, but yet there's a trust that was built with that panel where they really do give me good, honest answers, and they're willing to share more than maybe they will with others. That doesn't happen by just showing up. It's trust. So I think there's a commonality there in the sense that you may be dealing with more contentious topics, equally heavy. I mean, DEI is obviously an important and heavy discussion, but without that trust, I don't know how far you can go, even if that means you're tough. So I wanted to ask you about that. How important, because I think it plays to everything with what all of us do in life, no matter what our profession, the importance maybe for people in building teams or successful companies in trust. How significant is that trust? Don't have to be friends, don't have to agree, but how important is that trust with your guests that are often coming to you from both sides?
Trust is a huge deal. And in fact, more so in a local market than if you were in, say, a New York or a Washington or a Los Angeles, in a media market there, where, for instance, you might not see these people again. We have to live in the same community. We're going to be seeing those folks once again. So these have to be long-term relationships. These are not, I'm going to bash you on the show and I'm not going to have to worry about you again. I'm going to be seeing that person 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road. I'm going to be trying to do a debate or another program. So you have to be seen as a fair broker, an honest broker of dialogue. That is a huge component of it. The best we can do today, I think is the only group in society currently that is above water, that's above 50% in public trust, is the military. There used to be even law enforcement. That has been diminished in the last year. But the media, whether it be doctors, whether it be judges, politicians, are all, nobody trusts them. And so the best you can do, as I view it today, is to be fair. And that means also following the rules. So if you're doing a debate, for instance, and this drives me insane if you see presidential debates where they allow candidates to go beyond the time limits and so on, and then all the public cares about is that you're being fair. So if you ever see me do a debate, I cut people off immediately as that happens, because that's all. The best you can be is the best umpire of that conversation. And that is the secret of it. But it's not about the host of the show. That's the other thing to me is I'm trying to make myself as small as I possibly can. The goal is to be, my wife says you talk for a living. I said, no, I'm in the listening business. Now that sounds really like, oh, that's so precious, Nick. But really, in a sense, it is true. You're there to be the listening. And I want to construct questions that are going to be the shortest possible to get it back to the guest. That's what it's about. And in panel conversations, the secret in panel conversations, as you talk about with, you might be doing 4 people, 5 people, sometimes 6 people on a panel, is you're lifting all boats. You are shifting entirely what your questions are going to be to make sure that you're elevating everybody at the same time, because you have the audience perhaps at home or in the theater, but you've also got, this is your main audience at this point in time. You have to keep all of those people engaged, like the circus plate spinner.
Mm-hmm. I sometimes use the sports analogy, being a host for Royals pre and post game shows, or in the role as a moderator outside of baseball. I like to use the basketball analogy that you're the point guard. Your job is to set it up and allow others to score. If they can't score, sometimes you've got to take over and do that yourselves and drive the ship. But for the most part, you're better off backing off and putting it out there. How you talk about listening, it's so important with all of what we do, no matter what the profession. How scripted are you with your questions? Obviously, you do your homework. You live for this. I can't imagine how much reading and preparation you're doing every single day. But how much of that is scripted out questions, and how much is just listening and on the fly saying, "Wait a minute, I want to go there"?
It is about preparation. You're absolutely right. But that's true of sports, folks.
Sure.
That the commentator who, when there's a lull in the game, can then say, little stats along the way to fill the gap when there's no action taking place on the field. We need to make sure, when I start a show, for instance, I'm looking at all of the problems in advance. So for me, preparation is about doing a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, a plan D. I have 4 shows in my mind. What if that guest cancels? What if that panelist isn't there? What if that contrary voice isn't there? I need to be able to fill that void with my questions to make sure that point of view is looked at. I remember the quote, we don't, when the pressure is on, we don't rise to the occasion. We fall to our lowest level of preparation. I love that quote because that actually is true. So people will sometimes say to me, God, you're so fast on your feet, or wow, you really got out of that situation really well. But it's because I'm already figuring out in advance what those problems are going to be, that the teleprompter is not going to work. So for instance, I will always have the script in front of me. That's why you have the script. And I'm always moving that script. So I always know, even if somebody else is falling down on the job, that I can make sure everything seems still effortless and move on. And so it's those details that help set you up for success. We just did a show, by the way. I was a producer for someone who was doing a show on critical race theory. And critical race. And so the host, during the show, there's a wasp in the studio. And he said, oh, I'm sorry, there's a wasp. And he's batting his head. And I say in his ear, it's a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, okay? Which he says, and it cracks up the entire panel. And then somebody tells me afterwards, oh, that host is amazing. Look how fast on his feet he is. And I said, well, I told him that. But it's like, it is being able to then always have a sense of humor, okay, which can also disguise a million sins. And to make sure that you're prepared again for things going wrong. And that's what I try to think through prior to ever putting myself in a situation.
You're speaking my language. And, of course, having done live television for 27 years and 300 plus shows a summer for the last 14, something always goes wrong. That's life. I mean, something's always going to go wrong. How do you react to it? People will say all the time to me, and I'm sure to you, do you ever get nervous? The answer to me is no, but I'll say, do you get nervous when you walk into work every day? Do you get nervous when you go into the boardroom? Maybe for some really big something, but for the most part, this is what we do every day. And then you adjust. I would ask you this: what would you have said in my ear about 4 years ago when I'm doing a post-game show in Oakland? And let me say, for some reason, the birds, the pigeons, whatever they are, all know when the game is over that's when they come into the stadium and they feed on all the leftover food. And so I'm doing a live show on the field in Oakland, and thankfully, right as we're going to a break, not as we're right coming back, the bird decided to leave a mark on my cheek and a little bit on my shoulder. Thankfully, I was rescued by a commercial break for 20 seconds. I rolled with it. How would you handle that? Because how did you roll with it? I think we were going to video and a bump right 5 or 10 seconds later. I think I might have just done one of these wipes and
Yeah.
just sort of kept on going. I can tell you this, and behind the scenes. So I didn't actually have to say anything. Now you got to, if it's live television and it's very obvious and you're on camera for 30 or 40 seconds with the bird crap sitting on your face, you probably need to make some type of joke, but not say too bad of a word. All I know is that, and I knew this would happen, that the truck captured that video and it still lives in existence because they love those moments.
I would say something to the effect of, wow, I think this has been one of my best broadcasts. Even the birds think so. They're appreciating me.
There's so many ways to go there. And of course, if it were HBO or something like that, I really could have gone some other directions. But, you can never plan for all of this. But I totally agree with you. I heard or read a quote years ago, and I don't know who it was because somebody said it was General MacArthur. Somebody said it was what was the scientist? That doesn't matter, but it was something along the lines of chances favor the prepared man. I think that's the way they said it back then. And
but that's true. That's true of the sports stars, though. I mean, you think about the Steph Currys and the LeBron James of the world. People say, wow, they're doing amazing things, but how much time are they spending, practicing all of this? Right. That's what allows them to do what they do. And we're no different. And right. You have to be thinking through all of these scenarios in advance and practicing. And that's, by the way, why I'm very generous with my time. I could probably be out, as you can, hosting events and charity galas and things like that. And while I've tried to say no a little more to those things, because it can take up your entire family life, but I like to do them because, to me, these are experiments and laboratories for trying out new things. And some things work in those environments. Like, boy, I'm going to take that and use that in television. Some things bomb and you're never going to do it again. And but it is an opportunity to refine your craft and be a practice venue where you don't have tens of thousands of people watching you. If you make a mistake, you just got a few hundred in the audience.
Yep, that's right. And over time, you learn to handle those mistakes. They're going to happen. I know they used to eat me up. And you're right. I mean, in the smaller audience, you can do some things. They're going to be forgiving. On the bigger audience, hey, stuff happens too. Couldn't agree with you more on that. I wanted to ask you about our beloved topic of journalism. And, I find that, and this is the Pandora's box of the world that we live in, whether it be social media, whether it's the fact that, no, we don't have 3 television channels anymore. We don't have to get up and press the button on that cable box that we had. We have our remotes or our phones and our devices and our streaming services. You can get your news everywhere. And there's a pretty good chance, like I'll say to my son, hey, did you hear about, I don't even ask him that anymore because he already got the alert on his phone for whatever update it was. So I think it's harder to be relevant. What has happened over time is that everyone wants to be the loudest voice in the room. And, oh, by the way, if you're wrong, so what? We were just trying to get it first as opposed to being right, which leads to the misinformation and the distrust that you're talking about. And it's just this slippery slope and on and on and on. Yet you are still able to conduct a traditional news program. I think people learn more from your program locally than anything that they're going to do. That's my opinion and certainly compliment. But there's not much of that out there anymore, Nick. It's harder to find because of all the noise. How do you sift through it all?
Yeah. My view is there's a lot more information there, but we're basically hyper-serving the folks who are political junkies, the news junkies. So it's not like there's a large group of people who are not consuming any of this news whatsoever. And you think about that even in elections, people say, President, Trump versus Joe Biden. You could say a third of the country voted for President Trump, a third of the country voted for Joe Biden, and a third of the country didn't even bother to take part whatsoever. And so those folks are not part of anything. They're not engaged in any of these, even though you've got huge numbers of channels, you've got all of these social media news, they're not taking part in that whatsoever. I like to use the phrase, and this is another one of my favorite quotes, we are drowning in information, but starved of understanding. And we have so much, we have this paralysis basically, because it's too much information. What I like to believe, what we're trying to accomplish in a 30-minute program, in fact, 26 minutes, less time than it takes for you to deliver a pizza to your home, you can get a better understanding of what's happening in your community, regardless of which side of state line you live in Kansas City and Kansas or Missouri. In some respects, we're sort of the windshield wipers of the car that is helping you have a better insight and vision of what's ahead of you, and connects the dots for you when, again, it's too much information. You can't possibly understand it all. That helps to be an honest broker to guide you through it.
The beauty of what you're able to do too, and this is true in other markets, is that you can focus on mostly the local, I mean, certainly national implications, and no one else is going to do that for the most part. So you have a lane in a similar way that no one can do a 30-minute or 26-minute or, whatever it is, pregame show about the Royals and a postgame show about the Royals. There's no other outlet to do that. So it becomes what you do with it. And then, of course, it's back to the trust, not just with your panel, but also with your audience. And they understand that, hey, when I watch Nick, I'm going to get a fair representation and on and on. Does that even exist nationally?
No, I like what you say about the lane, because actually I do jealously guard that. And in fact, I remember Lance Armstrong came to Kansas City. And yes, this was after the scandal. And then he was going to do something for one of the big companies here. And I was called, would you like to interview him? And I said, what value would he provide on my program? Because that show isn't about, he was just here. He wasn't here to talk about anything about Kansas City. There was no, it wasn't, Joe Biden coming into Kansas City to help raise money for a governor or something of that nature, where you could have had a tie-in. Or you can even ask Donald Trump was president and he was coming to Kansas City and wanted to do something. There are still a lot of local tie-ins. I said, no, that wasn't what this show was about. So knowing what you're doing, and you're exactly right, I jealously guard it because there are a million outlets you can go to today to know what's happening in Washington, D.C. We do not need to amplify that. But I came at this in the early 90s. I was covering the Kansas legislature. And that was at a time, Joel, when Kansas was going to reinstate the death penalty. Abortion had become, for the very first time now, a massive issue. And you had protests outside of abortion clinics, all starting in the early 90s in Wichita. And I was covering the Kansas legislature during that period of time. These were life and death decisions being made by legislators in a state level that most people couldn't even name. They couldn't tell you who their state representative or state senator was. Yet these were life and death decisions that in any other Western democracy would be made at the highest level of national government. And here, people don't even know who they are. And so I took that as a challenge and an opportunity and a responsibility to be able to tell that story. And what I did differently was that I didn't come from the political world. So I could look at it rather than look at it from the politician down, I looked at it from the citizen up. And why on earth should you care about that? And that's something I still say today. Why on earth should you care about that? It is up to us to make these things valuable and understandable and express the implications and what's at stake for the citizens. Don't let them have to do too much work.
Right. Connect the dots for them and explain to them the why and the how. Why does it affect you? How does it affect you? And then they engage with that. So is the question I wanted to ask is there a national voice that does that? I think about Tim Russert, who I always thought was tough, like you're tough, but fair. No one walked out of Tim Russert's show. Maybe they did, accusing him of mistreating them. They might not have liked the questions or felt like they lost. But is there anything like that anymore?
Well, the appetite and expectations have changed of our elected officials and also of audiences. I remember actually we did a whole half hour with Sam Brownback, the former governor of Kansas. He was the governor at the time. And I just asked very fair questions to him about why the concerns about certain aspects. I gave him plenty of time to answer. When he left the studio after 30-minute conversation, the press secretary of Sam Brownback said, Governor, your SUV is outside. They're waiting for you. She came back in and said, he is never stepping foot in this building again. You screwed him over. Okay. She then went to other guests we have on the program to try and get them to boycott the show. Okay. There was nothing unfair about those questions. It is the appetite today that we're going to be in venues that we're not going to be challenged. We're not going to be asked tough questions. I try to be incredibly respectful, but clearly that mood, that expectation has shifted. Our view of what the media does has shifted dramatically, which is why, back to one of your earlier questions, I think my values are the same today. The people we interview and the audience, their expectations have shifted.
Yeah, I find, and this is, I think, going to be my last question before I get to my baseball themed questions. The one that drives me nuts, Nick, and sometimes it's justified, but it's across the board. It's used as it's the modern day version of "I was misquoted," is just blame the media, because it's easier then to say, well, I didn't do it, it was their fault. Some extent of that has always gone on. You clearly dealt with it with Sam Brownback, but nowadays it seems to me like they're going to blame the media and then tell everybody to boycott you or whatever it is. And they're going to do that because the media becomes the enemy more than ever. Is this just a cycle? Do we get through this? I mean, you talked about trust before, but it makes me, it's like nails on a chalkboard when I hear over and over again, blame the media.
Yes, but the finger, we are in a finger pointing culture, and we have to remove the blame from ourselves in all aspects. I will say, coming from the United Kingdom, what has been amazing to me, and I forget about this, but the access, though, to major decision makers, whether it be a member of Congress or a police chief. In fact, I can't remember when you could even talk to a police chief in the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. The access that you have here and the willingness of elected officials to engage with you is kind of remarkable in contrast. So I'm going to celebrate that as a major difference between, I worked for the BBC before I came here. I was one of 12 people taken on by the radio news division of the BBC, and before coming to the United States. So I have a good compare and contrast going on. These are things that are happening everywhere, but in thinking about it, it is certainly much more access here to those folks.
Interesting. Baseball themed questions. Let's start with the home run. Professionally speaking, you mentioned BBC, been here forever in Kansas City on PBS and much, much more. What's the biggest home run that you have hit in your career?
Well, I've won 4 regional Emmy Awards, but I'm not huge into awards. The thing that really actually, the thing I still believe is the best thing we ever did was when we did the bi-state 2 tax election. If you remember, that was where the Kansas Cityans on both sides of state line would come together to vote on sports stadium improvements and the arts improvements in Kansas City. And we decided to do a trial. And I got a Kansas Court of Appeals judge to preside over a trial. I brought in 2 court trial attorneys to be prosecutors and defenders. We got a jury. We used the Bar Association to find 12 people to be jurors. And we brought the sports leaders from Arrowhead and Kauffman stadiums and the arts leaders together and did it as a real trial. It was a huge deal at the time. We built a courtroom in the studio, and it was one of the most successful programs we ever did. It was a creative way of trying to get information out to the public in a very different way. And to me, I still look back at that as the home run of the things that we've done.
Love that. How about a swing and a miss? And what did you learn from that?
Swing and a miss. Okay, here's a swing and a miss. So PBS did a whole series on during an earlier crime wave about how we're going to solve crime in America. And I had a grant available to me to do a local version of this. And I thought it would be interesting to talk to criminals about solutions to crime. I thought it was an innovative way of doing that. I tried to go into a state prison, couldn't do that, but the sheriff in Clay County said we could come to the Clay County Detention Center, where they arranged for 6 inmates. 3 of them were armed robbers, 2 were serial burglars, and there was a 6th petty criminal came there. We interviewed them, talk with them about their solutions for crime. It was an amazing program. I thought it was extraordinary. We got the access. They made themselves vulnerable. They had interesting ideas. About 2 weeks later, Fox 4 News in Kansas City calls me and says, Nick, we loved your program. Could we use an excerpt on our primetime news? Well, of course, I was absolutely flattered. I patted myself on the back for a job well done. How amazing. Other people are picking this up. So I tune in that night to watch it. And it says, 2 men have escaped from the Clay County Detention Center. And they were using the footage because these 2 guys who were giving us this thing about how they'd been rehabilitated and not only solutions to crime had escaped from the place. So that was a humility. that you need to have. That's what you learn from that. This
Yeah.
Don't build yourself up too much. You might be coming for a fall. That was one of my most humble moments.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't have predicted it, but it's that reminder every time we think that we hit that home run, it can be taken away from you pretty quickly. So yes, indeed, a lesson in humility. Final baseball theme question is small ball, the bunts, the sacrifices, the defense that our beloved Royals, you're Kansas City and longer than I've been, used to win the World Series in 2015. What are the little things in Nick Haines' world that add up to the big results?
Yeah, and that goes back to something we've referred to before, and that was the preparation. Get up early in the morning every day, read every single newspaper possible, every single news outlets possible, so I'm best prepared. So when things go wrong, as they always will, I'm ready to effortlessly still lead that program. That's where professionalism comes in. Anybody thinks they can come in and do a program. If everything's running smoothly, many people can, but most of the time it doesn't, and how you are able to perform in that role is what separates you.
All right, 4 final questions as we round the bases. I'll start lighthearted and then we'll work to the more serious stuff. The first is this: I'm sure almost every day or on a regular basis, you're asked about the accent. We've clearly determined that it is real. It's not a fake thing. Probably some people even ask you to do their voice messages or whatever it is, because it's a nice sounding accent and voice. My friend Tracy DeMaria, I don't know if you know her from the Johnson County Bar Association. She does people's voicemails as well. And it's like, she just sounds so nice. Your guys' accents are better. My question is this: does the accent give you extra credibility?
The accent is a double-edged sword. Joe Posnanski, by the way, the longtime sports writer, used to be with the Kansas City Star, writes about baseball, once wrote a Thanksgiving column in the Kansas City Star, and he listed all the people he was thankful for, and one of those was Nick Haines, and he wanted me to do his voice, my voice on his voicemail. Okay. I went to a Firestone to get my car repaired, and a guy said, "Is the only reason you're on television here because you have a British accent?" I said, "Well, I'd like to believe there are other qualities that I bring to the table." But there is that. So there's a double-edged sword. There's a guy on Facebook who reached out and said, "I'm the worst thing that's ever come to Kansas City." And so, you think about, we've had serial killers here, of course, over the years, yet I'm the worst thing ever. So those things happen. I think part of it is the expectation, because we see, and we are as guilty as ever, because we are on public television where we show all these British shows, and British people live in these mansions and they have a certain background. I come from a very working class background, lived in public housing most of my life from a single parent mother. So that is not the background I come from. But because of the accent, it comes with a lot of loaded expectations of where you came from.
So let's go to my second question, and then we'll get off of the British angle. But what is the difference? You alluded to it a little bit, but what is the difference between, in general, British news and U.S. news?
Well, I think this is far more entertainment driven here. This is far more personality driven. I remember when I worked for the BBC and you'd watch the BBC News at 10, they wouldn't tell you who the newsreader is. It was just they were presenting the news. Here it's ABC News with David Muir. Sitting in for David Muir tonight is blank. The personality behind it is incredibly important here. It isn't in Britain. It is the content itself. That's one major distinction between the two.
All right, 2 final questions then as we continue to round the bases. These will be a little bit on the harder side, I suppose. Not hard for you, but just a little bit more serious. First is, what do you see as the big issues of 2022? I understand it could change even in the time that you and I record this, but in general, we have an idea of where this country is right now. We're dealing with a lot of stuff. We always have. It just changes. What are the big issues that you're eyeballing in 2022?
Well, one of the most pressing ones, of course, in Kansas City will be the new police chief, the chief will be retiring in the spring of 2022. Who are we going to find to be a new police chief? In fact, that has become one of the most daunting jobs in America. We used to do a show, by the way, our year in review show. We'd ask, what is the most complicated job, the most difficult job in Kansas City? It used to be the superintendent of the Kansas City, Missouri school district. Today, is it the police chief? Right now, we have the tenure for a police chief in the United States is 2.5 years. It is very hard to find people to do that role anymore. And the expectations have gone through the roof. And so that's going to be one of the big challenges for the future, as social justice and our expectations as a public have shifted about what the police and law enforcement should be doing in this country.
So that we know is coming, and there'll be much, much more, whether it be COVID related or midterms or stadiums or who knows what. There'll never be a shortage of issues for sure.
And a lot of them, you could do this any year and the issues would probably be the same. 20 years ago, how many of the same issues we're dealing with? They just changed the characters.
That's right. And that'll be the case again. I suspect in 20 years, they might be receiving
we'll come
it on
back.
a different
We'll come back in 20 years and we'll see if we were right.
Yeah, I don't know that there'll be podcasts at that point. Who knows how we'll be doing this, but we'll be doing it in some form or another. Final question, the walk-off question. This is the big one I always love to ask any of my friends in the journalism world is, what is the future of journalism? And, I came up in a system, Nick, where I just wanted to be on the news talking sports. And so I worked for the local television stations, climbing my way from the small market to the bigger market to eventually doing baseball full time. But I don't see kids necessarily coming out of the University of Kansas or wherever it is. For me, it was the University of Wisconsin with the dream of necessarily being on TV. It might be being on social media, reporting on Instagram or Snapchat or whatever it is. And of course, we're watching all of this on our phones. What is the future of journalism?
Well, firstly, there are more students in journalism at American universities today than there are jobs in journalism. So people have to change their expectation of what that is. As you talk about what you wanted to be as a child, when I was going to school, you look at what people wanted to be then. They were things like astronauts. Nobody says that anymore. You look at the yearbook for our kids, my daughter's high school that she just graduated from, and you look at what people say they wanted to be. And for most part, they say they want to be famous. And that is a challenge when it comes to news, because the chances of you being famous is the same as somebody who just is good at basketball being in the NBA or good at baseball being in the major leagues. We have to change our expectations. I think it's all going to become far more niche. One of the challenges for us in public television is we are jacks of all trade. You come to public television, for instance, and we do a little bit of cooking, and you love the news programs or documentaries, and we do nature programs and science programs and children's programs. But we're in a universe today where people go for one specific targeted area. So for us, we have a major challenge, fundamental issue to decide as what we want to be. Are we going to narrow our focus to today's environment? If you want to listen to comedy, you go to the Comedy Channel. If you want to watch food, you go to the Food Network. So that is going to be a fundamental thing. We're going to be far more niche. The biggest problem is the common vocabulary, the common language we have between one another. Today, we have so many channels. You can say, hey, did you see that show last night? And chances are good, most people you're going to talk to have no clue what you're talking about. Not just, oh, I didn't see it. They have absolutely no clue what the show was, or they don't even know who the actors are. Because we have so many places you can go for these things, we can't even have a conversation with one another. And so that's why these award shows, of course, are plummeting, because most people have never even seen any of those programs and have no access to some of the programs that are being awarded. That's going to be a major challenge, is finding those places where we can have a common conversation, which, by the way, sports is still that common language still in America that, still gets a mass audience to see Patrick Mahomes or a baseball team play. That is one of the very few areas left where we can actually come together and have a similar conversation with one another.
Just had this discussion with the CEO last night, who said sports are the common link, and the arts, whether it be music or theater, where for the most part, we can get along. We don't have to like the same team, but we can all be there together and enjoy the game. And hopefully that never changes, but everything changes. That's the way it goes. And so we shall see. Nick Haines has been my guest. The amount of awards are too many to list, but he mentioned the 4 Emmys. By the way, he and I have combined to win 5 Emmys. So thank you very much for your contribution there, Nick. But President's Award for Outstanding Service, Casey's Top Power People in 2017, 39 Most Influential Media People Shaping the Future of Kansas City, Best Media Personality, on and on. But I can say this much, having watched Nick from afar, finally had a chance to meet recently. We had coffee. See, Brits don't just do tea, they do coffee as well, is that he's got amazing energy, passion, and a fairness that enables you, I'm speaking to you too, that enables you to go places that not everyone does, and to bring us there as the viewers. And that is the programming I'll put in my 2 cents for PBS, whether it be here in Kansas City or if you're watching or listening around the country, wherever that PBS is. I'll throw out the website too, kansascitypbs.org. But Nick, I really appreciate it, the perspective, the energy, the humor, and all of it that goes into who Nick Haines is. And I'm glad that you met a Kansas girl in Russia, because it means that we've had you here for all those years.
That you've made it all worthwhile. Thank you, Joel.
Nick, I appreciate it. Thanks.